Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth. Today we're looking at Act 4, Scene 3. And what a scene it is, because as you would imagine, having just seen the death of the Macduff family, we're probably waiting for a big, tense moment where Macduff finds out the fate of his family. And we will get that, but first, it gets a little odd. We start off with Malcolm and Macduff chatting because Macduff has joined Malcolm in England to join the army. And rather than just saying, hooray, I remember what a great guy you were before, instead he decides, Malcolm that is, to do a little bit of testing. So he tells Macduff that he is worse than Macbeth, that if he becomes king, he will turn Scotland into an even worse state than it is already because he is so full of sin. In fact, he says he doesn't have a single grace that is worthy of a king. Macduff, funnily enough, says, oh dear, well that's not good. Scotland is done for. I will about turn and go home because there's no point being here, which is the right answer because Malcolm says or thinks to himself, oh, I see, you're loyal to Scotland, not a particular individual. Don't worry, my friend. I was telling some porcupines. In fact, I am actually very, very, very virtuous indeed. Macduff is suitably perplexed by this little trick, but we don't get to dwell on it too much because obviously Ross arrives to give Macduff some horrifying news, and the news he gives is that his whole family have been killed, which leads to, understandably, some incredible grief, and so it's really kind of sad watching and reading, but we'll look at that in a moment. Grief turns to resolve, however, and they are determined to get, I'm going to say justice rather than revenge or vengeance, because obviously this is about getting, like restoring balance, hence the picture of Lady Justice. But I think her sword is more relevant here because they are planning on it to be a violent justice. There's no doubt about that. Right, let's have a little look at some of the earlier parts of the scene. Okay, so this is literally the very beginning of the scene as Macduff arrives and Malcolm's like, let's have a bit of a chinwag and weep our sad bosoms empty. So a nice bit of hyperbole there, saying let's talk about how awful it is and just have a little bit of a sad moment together. And Macduff is like, no, we've got to get moving. Okay, so we've got to hold fast the mortal sword. So nice little bit of personification here, up here as well. The idea of their hearts, their bosoms being sad. And like good men bestride our downfall and birthdom, he's like, right, come on, women, let's get going. Nice little bit of kind of typical traits of the masculine man of Shakespeare in England. We have this wonderful anaphora here to emphasize and demonstrate the vastness of the suffering. So each new morn, so every single day, new widows howl, so reminder of all the husbands dying. New orphans cry, so parents, both mum and father being killed. New sorrows strike heaven on the face. So the repetition of the adjective new at the beginning of each of those phrases demonstrates how the suffering is ongoing. It just keeps on happening again and again and again. And then we have this lovely little personification here about how the sorrows strike heaven on the face. So heaven is sort of mortified and is in pain at the sight of all of this suffering. That it resounds as if it felt with Scotland and yelled out like a syllable of dollar. So it's like all of the pain is emphasized. I think that vastness of suffering is also demonstrated really well here through that juxtaposition of old and young, that it's not just the women that are grieving the men, it's all of the tiny children as well. So scene begins with a reminder of just how dreadful everything is. Malcolm's concerns are quite relevant and valid because Malcolm is worried that Macduff might not be true, that Macduff might also be potentially going to betray him. And that's what we see in this quote here. I am young, but something you may deserve of him through me, and wisdom to offer up a weak, poor, innocent lamb to appease an angry God. So let's have a little look at this particular image. He's basically saying, I think that you have come here to trick me and to deliver me to him. And he positions himself as the weak, poor, innocent lamb. So here we've got this zoomorphic metaphor describing himself as being like an animal, but the animal is also personified through that adjective innocent. Okay, so he's an innocent lamb. You'll probably notice that there's a little bit of a kind of a biblical tone going on here as well, because Jesus is the Lamb of God. So yeah, lambs are associated with innocence, but also God, and that makes sense because he's the rightful heir, i.e. God, and then him. So it's a really, really fitting metaphor to use. And then it's juxtaposed here with to appease an angry God. Okay, so he's describing Macbeth here as an angry God. Note an angry God, not the God, okay, because that would be quite blasphemous. But he's basically imagining himself as a sacrifice to Macbeth. And so that's why he carries out this rather peculiar test. So let's see how Malcolm tests Macduff. Firstly, he tells Macduff that Black Macbeth will seem as pure as snow. So note we've got the simile here, and we've got this colour symbolism juxtaposed, the blackness of Macbeth and the pure as snow, which obviously connotes whiteness. So good versus evil coming up again here. But in this case, he's saying that Macbeth will seem good, will seem pure, will seem white in comparison to him. The poor state will esteem him as a lamb, so the whole of Scotland will view him as the lamb. So again, note that repetition from the way that he described himself earlier on. Compared with my confineless harms. Confineless, an adjective, means that they know no bound. So he sets out a really bold statement here saying, I am considerably worse than Macbeth. Everyone will think Macbeth was a dreamboat in comparison to me, which obviously gives Macduff an opportunity to say, no, that will never be. Don't be daft. So Malcolm goes into a little bit more detail. First of all, he says that there's no bottom to his voluptuousness, meaning that there's no limit to his desire that he has for women. Note the way he then lists your wives, your daughters, your matrons, and your maids. So we've got this wonderful list here. Could not fill up the cistern of my lust. Now, that's quite a horrible metaphor there, because cisterns remind you of, like, you know, toilets and flushing mechanisms. So he's reminding us of the kind of almost like the dirtiness of his sin, which is of lust. And he says that it doesn't matter how many women they provided him, he would never be satiated. He'd never be happy. And Macduff is like, ooh, okay, that's not great, but you know, we've plenty willing women, you know, they're going to make you feel all right. So, okay, it's not great, Malcolm, but you know, there are worse things in a king. So Malcolm thinks, well, I better carry on with this test. So he's like, right, not only am I going to have sex with all of your women, I'm also going to take all of the land from the nobles. So he'll cut off the nobles for their land. So he'll even like kill them off just so he can collect the land back in. He'll desire his jewels and this other's house. Note the vagueness of this other. It's like his house. Who's that dude over there? Yeah, I'll have his house too. And we've got this metaphor to do with food here. My more having would be as a sauce to make me hunger more. So the more he gets, it would just be like licking up the last bits of the sauce, and then he'd be like, oh, where's my next bit? Where's my next? So he's also saying that he will never be satisfied in terms of his greed. So another sin, we've had lust, we've had greed. And again, Macduff is saying, ooh, that's really not good. That's really not good. But again, Scotland's a big place. We've got plenty land, so you know there's plenty to satisfy you. So he's still trying to kind of keep going with Malcolm. And then Malcolm puts the final nail in the coffin, because he tells him that he has no kingly graces. So all of the graces that you would associate with a king, he's like, no, not one, not a single thing. And then the metaphor gets really dark, because he says if he had power, so if he were king, he would pour the sweet milk of concord into hell, uproar the universal peace, confound all unity on earth. So apocalyptic metaphor here, basically saying he would bring hell to earth. So the only thing worse than Macbeth would be him. Now, at this point, Macduff is like, oh, goodness me, holy moly, what have I done? And so he's like, right, I've got this wrong. Nation miserable. Scotland is in. Untitled tyrant, bloody sceptred. So he's like, already, you know, you've got this awful person running the country, but there's no end. When shall thou see wholesome days again? So even if we get rid of Macbeth, we put this person in, still no wholesome days, fare thee well. So off he trots. And like I said before, it's only then that Malcolm goes, kidding, it was a joke, it's fine, I'm still a virgin, I am fine, I never lie, except for then. And like I said before, it doesn't really give, there's not really enough chance for Macduff to kind of take all of that in, because Ross arrives with the horrible news. Okay, so Ross appears on the scene here, and this is quite a baffling little moment in the play, because he actually tells a lie to Macduff, and he puts off revealing the truth about what's happened to his family. I think it's important that we note Malcolm's question here, what's the newest grief? The superlative adjective newest, reminding us of how many griefs or tragedies happen on a regular basis now. But the dramatic irony here is really, really prevalent, because of course we know exactly what the newest grief is, but Macduff doesn't. Ross reminds us again of how much grief there is, because he says each minute teems a new one, so every single minute something else is happening that's dreadful. I think it's quite important that we recognise that the first thing Macduff says is, how does my wife? So Lady Macduff's fears that he didn't love her, I'm not sure are true. I just think that he felt that his duty to the country was more important in that moment in time. And Ross Ross lies. He says, well, all my children well too. But note, Macduff, the first thing that he's considering here is his family. Note the shared lines here in terms of form. And again, there could be different reasons for that. It could just be demonstrating the unity of them in that moment, the fact that they are allies. It could be that Ross is demonstrating, or Ross is speaking quite quick off the mark, perhaps because he's dreading what needs to be said, and so is quickly sort of filling in the gaps. Leaves that to you to decide, because it's different interpretations. This is the bit that is probably most poignant, because Macduff asks, the tyrant has not battered at their peace. So obviously we've got this very violent metaphor here of the tyrant being Macbeth, obviously not violently destroying their sense of peace and stability and home. And what Ross does is he repeats the same word. Shakespeare's being quite clever here. He's using a pun, which allows Ross to speak vaguely truthfully. So when he says, no, they were well at peace when I did leave them, well, that's true. They were when he left them. They were at peace. But he could also be referring to resting in peace, as in they are now in peace because they're dead. So he's obviously kind of dreading telling Macduff the truth, which is strange when you see how brutal the description is when he does actually deliver it. And here it is. Your castle is surprised, your wife and babes savagely slaughtered, to relate the manner on the quarry of those murdered deer. So the fact that he's been trying to kind of like avoid the subject before, suddenly it all comes out in a flurry, in a really kind of brutal way. So note the way that the castle is personified here. The castle is surprised, no one was expecting it. Your wife and babe savagely slaughtered. I think that sibilance, you can say alliteration if you want, but sibilance is more specific because it's the repeated S sound. The sibilance really draws attention to how emotive those words are. Savagely, the adverb there, slaughtered. So not just killed, he's drawing attention to just how brutal and gruesome the death was. And then to emphasize it further, he uses a hunting analogy to relate the manner were on the quarry of those murdered deer. Now, the quarry of those murdered deer, he's using the image of the end of a hunt scene where all of the deer that have been murdered are piled up into like a body. So he's sort of giving Macduff the image of a heap of corpses. And then to make it even more brutally emotive, he uses this pun, and so it's a homonymic pun, that's when your words sound the same. with dear and dear. So dear, D-E-A-R, meaning loved ones. So yeah, he really is creating the image of a pile of corpses of all of the people Macduff ever loved. So what a juxtaposition in tone from being a bit vague, being a bit careful with your words, to saying it in the worst possible way ever. And obviously this leads Macduff to really wonder, to what extent is this his fault? So first of all, you can just see the kind of shock and the horror that he has. All my pretty ones, did you say all? So note all that repetition. Well, all my pretty chickens and their dam at one fell swoop. So again, more zoomorphic metaphors here, but again, it's that idea of his love for them. They're his pretties, they're the pretty ones, you know, there's a sort of sense of their vulnerability, but it's the fact that they're all gone, all in one go. So you can definitely see his grief there. Now, in terms of responsibility, he tries blaming someone else. He says, did heaven look on and would not take their part? I.e., so personified heaven, why didn't heaven intervene? And then realizes straight after, sinful Macduff, they were all struck for thee. So he actually says to himself, he's talking to himself here, this is your fault. This is on you. It's not their demerits, it's my demerits. That's why fell slaughter on their souls. It's me. So he has this moment of horrible responsibility, and he recognizes that by leaving them alone, that is why. And not just leaving them alone, it's by going against Macbeth. That is why his innocent wife and family and children have died. So it's a horrible moment for him, but what's it going to do? It's going to drive his rage. It's going to make him more determined to get vengeance. Malcolm uses this moment to give him some advice. I think it's really interesting looking at a kind of contemporary audience, so one at the time and how they'd feel, and us now, because depending on the tack Malcolm takes, it's quite interesting. So the first thing that he says is, ne'er pull your hat upon your brows, give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the overfraught heart and bids it break. Great advice, and the kind of advice we'd give nowadays. He's saying speak. Express yourself. Don't bottle it up. Bottling up's going to do you no good. Get it out. Yeah. So some good advice there. We can actually say, you know, well done, Malcolm. Then he says, be comforted. Nice imperative there. Let's make us medicines of our great revenge to cure this deadly grief. Okay. So we've got metaphor here of saying, I know if you get revenge, it will make you feel better. Now, bearing in mind him getting revenge ties in very nicely with what Malcolm wants, you could argue that this is ever so slightly cold and calculating, and that he's actually sort of using Macduff's grief as a way of winning back Scotland. That's quite a cynical view. You could also argue that he's just trying to give him like that sense of catharsis and that sense of drive and purpose. And again, you've got the same sort of advice here where he's saying, you know, be this the whetstone of your sword. So what a great metaphor. That's like sharpen your sword with this, yeah, with this grief, but don't let it be grief. Let grief convert to anger. So move away from these feelings of sadness. Blunt not the heart and rage it. So he says use it. So notice he's giving these imperatives, or using these imperatives, giving him instructions of how to use his grief. Contemporary audience, they'd be on it. 21st century audience, maybe we might feel ever so slightly uncomfortable. But it does the job, because Macduff's resolve, he says, front to front, brings out this fiend of Scotland and myself within my sword's length, set him. So he's literally like, let's go. I want to get in front of him. I want to fight him to the death. But you might think, for example, that it sounds quite familiar. It's that front to front repetition. It might make you think of Act 1, Scene 2, where it says arm against arm, point against point, rebellious arm against arm, when he's fighting, when Macbeth is fighting Norway. So note the way that we've almost come full circle, but now it's Macbeth that is the enemy, and Macduff that is fighting where Macbeth would have been. Okay, so at this point, Macduff is now hell-bent on fighting Macbeth, which makes sense. The witch has told Macbeth to beware Macduff, but one might argue, well, hang on a minute, would he need to had he not killed his family? tricksy little witches. And this is the last slide for us here, just a reminder of the themes that have come up. So the earlier themes, we were looking at things like kingship, so what it means to be a good king, what it means to be a bad king, which tied in really well with this notion of loyalty and good versus evil. Malcolm is testing Macduff's loyalty, not to him, but to Scotland. He's saying Scotland is more important, and he's using these kind of common ideas about what is good and what is evil to do that test. Obviously, death is significant here, and we see how death is a catalyst for the rest of the play, particularly the death of Macduff's family. It pushes his actions forward. Seeing the response that Macduff has to his family's death emphasises Macbeth's tyranny, because we really truly see just how desperately sad he is in this moment. And of course, we've got the concept of vengeance. I should have said or justice, question mark, because vengeance is obviously a much darker version, but it does feel quite dark at the end when he vows that violence towards him. Hopefully that was helpful. Drop me a note or question or two in the comments if you need anything, or give me any requests, and I'll see what I can do. Otherwise, please subscribe if you haven't already. Happy revising. Thank you for watching. See you again.